Ahí va. Ahí va. Ahí va. Ahí va.
Hey everyone, I'm Tim, and I've just finished a 9-month odyssey around Latin America. Now I'm reopening my diaries, and this time I'm bringing you along with me. Week by week, country by country, all the colors, all the craziness, all the food, all the music, and all the splendor. 9 months when each morning was a new adventure. The road was my companion, and Latin America cast its spell on me. This is my Latin America Diaries. Welcome back to my Latin America Diaries and Merry Christmas. After leaving the cool mountain air of Bogota, the spectacular cave city of Zipaquira, and the sweeping forested valleys of Boyaca, I began my descent down towards the Colombian Caribbean. This journey brought me to the city of Bucaramanga, the departmental capital of Santander, a region with its own distinct character, culture, and flavor, as so often is the case in Colombia. I caught a bus towards Bucaramanga from a bus station in the highway city of Barbosa, and while I was waiting for the bus to depart, I had lunch in a small restaurant there. And the owner of the restaurant came over to me with surprisingly good English and struck up a conversation about how he had once upon a time lived in the United States. Later that evening, the bus pulled into the Bucaramanga bus station, where I was greeted by Vitelma and Eolisis, the parents of my good friend Jimmy, who is originally from Colombia but now lives in Australia. If you think that Colombian hospitality so far has been remarkable, just wait until you see this, because they looked after me like their own son. They took care of me for the week that I was in Bucaramanga over Christmas, and not once did I feel like a guest. Originally, the plan had been for Jimmy and his partner Natasha to spend Christmas in Colombia, and we would all be there together. However, due to some logistical reasons, they weren't able to travel, so I got the full force of Vita and Elis's love for Jimmy, and I was basically their adopted son for the week. They promised me a Christmas that I would never forget, and they certainly delivered. If you want to see what that looks like, please like this video, subscribe, and make sure that you hit the bell icon to receive updates whenever I upload videos from this series. Also, if you're liking what you're seeing, please share my content and tell your family and friends about it. It really helps me to grow this YouTube channel and means a lot to me. You could say that it would be the perfect Christmas gift. On my first day in Bucaramanga, we woke up earlier, and Vita and Eolisis took me higher up into the mountains behind the city to the pineapple plantations that blanket the hillsides. Every year they host a special Christmas event for a group of underprivileged children who wait patiently and look forward to Santa to make his grand entrance. And this year, Santa would be played by an Australian tourist who just happened to be in Bucaramanga at the time, and who tried his very best to embody Papa Noel. It was my first time dressing up as Santa, and it was lots and lots of fun. It was such a joyful, ridiculous, heartwarming experience. The children were delighted, the parents were amused, and I had far more fun than I ever expected to while sweating it out in a red suit in the Colombian mountains. After that, I even got to spend some time with some family members who I had heard about from Jimmy for years in Australia before visiting there, and finally I was able to put faces to names. And it was a really heartwarming experience and made me feel even more connected to the family who had so generously taken me in. Bucaramanga is quite an uncanny city. It sits in a vast valley, but not neatly at the bottom. Instead, the urban sprawl clings to these enormous natural steps which are on the side of the mountain. It's as if the whole city has been poured out onto a giant terrace halfway down the canyon. Yet even below that, even more suburbs spill further out onto the valley floor. And then opposite, the mountains rise dramatically skywards again. The result is a city that feels almost topsy-turvy, with neighborhoods perched at different heights, stitched together by impressive bridges that leap across deep ravines threading through the metropolis. It's not Colombia's biggest or most significant city, but Bucaramanga still is important enough to have its own international airport, unusually built on a high plateau overlooking the city, probably the only place where they found flat land in the region. On the way back from the Santa experience, we stopped at a lookout near the runway, where you can watch planes appear out of nowhere and glide into this amazing natural amphitheater. We ate local snacks, grilled meats, corn with melted cheese, and of course arepas, while taking in the view. It was one of those uniquely Colombian scenes, a simple meal, a spectacular landscape, and that unmistakable warmth of family around you. The next day, Vitelma and Eulises took me into central Bucaramanga to visit the fruit market. Colombia prides itself on the sheer abundance and freshness of its fruits and vegetables, but nothing quite prepares you for the reality. Geographically, Colombia sits at a crossroads of ecosystems. The Amazon to the south, the Andes running through its spine, and the Caribbean to the north. Because of that, the biodiversity is staggering. I once read that you could eat a different Colombian fruit for every single day of the year and still not get through them all. And after seeing that market, I believe it. There were fruits that I had never seen before in my life, and many without English language names. Avocados the size of your head, and more varieties of corn than I imagined could actually exist.
See? Okay. Salute.
Muy rico. This is delicious. Eventually, we sat down for lunch and had sancocho, a hearty, flavor-packed soup made with assorted cuts of meats and plenty of vegetables. I was told that sancocho is one of those dishes that Colombians deeply crave when living abroad, because nothing outside the country ever tastes quite like the original. And after tasting that bowl at that market, I understand why. I had also been waiting up until this point to taste some of the street treats for which Colombia is famous. One of the first stops was a coconut stand that Ulysses introduced me to. Just a simple cart on the street run by a warm, smiling woman who clearly knew her craft. She served coconut water straight from the source, freshly pressed coconut milk, and best of all, this incredible candied coconut flesh. I think it might be my new favorite Colombian snack. Super sweet, sort of crunchy but chewy at the same time, and really coconutty. I was also desperate to try Café Tinto from the street. Of course, I had tried Café Tinto in a cafetero, but normally on a coffee plantation or in cafes. Whereas the vast majority of Colombians get their tinto at home or at little stalls like this on their way towards the office. The daily brew for Colombians is not like espresso. It's brewed in large pots in the morning and then decanted into big thermoses and served on street corners all day long. You can have it black or pepped up with sugar and a splash of milk. It's not a complex flavor, but it's unmistakably Colombian. Hot, strong, simple, and honest. Coffee in its purest, most local form. It's already quite sweet, actually. I haven't even mixed in the sugar yet, but it's already... See. And as if I hadn't had enough coffee, as we wandered the streets of Bucaramanga, we encountered this man who was selling cappuccino from a jetpack on his back. Vita and Ulysses told me that they normally saw him around the city and he would often knock on their office door to offer his services. Naturally, I said yes. He roams the city with this cart on his back, supplying coffee to the thirsty masses, and even carries a small bottle of aguardiente, the local anise-flavored spirit, which he can add to your cup on request. Now that is what I call service. All of this was happening in the run-up to Christmas, and before I knew it, Christmas Eve was upon us. As is the case in many Catholic majority countries, Colombia mostly celebrates Christmas on the 24th of December, not on the morning of the 25th, as in most of Australia. So here I was with Vitelma, Ulysses, and the whole extended family and a circle of friends, celebrating, exchanging gifts, dancing, and of course eating. And let me tell you, I thought that I had an appreciation for food, but this culture puts me to shame. Every turn I took, I was greeted with more food and this sort of warm, loving insistence that I eat more. And speaking of gifts, when I first arrived in Bucaramanga, Vita and Ulysses presented me with a sort of Bucaramanga gift pack. And in there were different things. There was a mug and some sweets, but there was also a packet of hormigas culonas, which are a type of ant that are traditionally fried until dry and crispy and eaten as a snack. They're only eaten in this part of Santander and not really anywhere else in Colombia. I did try them, however, I was so overwhelmed with hospitality while I was staying in Santander that I didn't get to try them until a couple of weeks later when I was staying with a friend, Fabian, in the city of Cali. So stay tuned for that video when it comes up. Also, speaking of gifts, obviously I wanted to get a gift to present to Vita and Ulysses on Christmas. However, so overbearing and loving was their hospitality that I wasn't able to get away from them to go shopping for a gift at any point until Christmas Eve. Thankfully, help came in the form of Edo, one of Jimmy's friends who I have heard about for many years because his nickname is Pikachu. So Pikachu picked me up and we went around the town to go Christmas shopping for Vita and Ulysses. However, I'm starting to think that I'm actually a very good liar because I needed an excuse to get away from Vitelma and Ulysses for the day to do the shopping. So I told them that Pikachu and I had been friends online for many years and we wanted to spend an afternoon to hang out. And apparently they fell for it, even through my broken Spanish. So that's one plaque on my mantle right there. Later that Christmas Eve, Ulysses brought out his accordion, which is an instrument that features in a lot of Colombian music, and the sound of the accordion filled the room with people singing along, and I felt completely wrapped up in the atmosphere of joy, family and celebration. To be welcomed so fully and to be treated not as a guest but as one of their own was deeply touching. And then, at midnight, as tradition dictates, fireworks erupted from across the skyline of Bucaramanga. Bursts of color lit up the valley from every direction, echoing off the mountains that cradle the city. This was my Colombian Christmas Eve, an explosion of warmth, generosity, music, and magic. The next morning, we headed out on a family trip, as many Colombians do on the 25th of December. We headed to Mesa de los Santos, literally the tabletop of the saints, a mountaintop ridge just south of Bucaramanga, overlooking the grand valleys that I had passed through on my bus journey from Boyaca. Up on the ridge there were a few small attractions that looked like theme parks, and of course more food. I got to taste a delicious local treat, a mix of dulce de leche, jam and cream. So you might think that this cable car starts here and finishes down in the bottom of the valley, but actually if you look further you'll notice that it goes all the way along there to there, but then at that station it actually continues up the valley. You can see more of the cable cars going up there and all the way up to this theme park or some kind of like recreation park up here on top of the mountain. And later we stopped for dinner where I got to try local arepas made with fresh farmer's cheese. The journey back to Bucaramanga that evening was much slower than the ride up the mountain, thanks mostly to holiday traffic, which is not surprising considering that this is one of the busiest travel days of the year. We arrived back in Bucaramanga absolutely exhausted, and I have so much respect for Ulysses for taking us around that day and for driving so much off the back of the night before. I mean, I don't know how you did it, but respect. But as they say, there is no rest for the wicked. The next morning we caught up with Sandra, who is Vitelma's sister, who had just arrived in with her family from Ocaña, which is in North Santander. She was in Bucaramanga because her daughter Paula, who is Jimmy's cousin and is also a good friend of mine who lives in Melbourne, she was arriving with her partner Pablo, and they were going to be spending the next couple of days in Bucaramanga. That evening was to be my last in Bucaramanga. However, unbeknownst to me, Vitelma and Ulysses had organized a Bucaramanga birthday party for me because obviously they'd heard about this from Jimmy through social media. So We went out that night and she had prepared a Malbec cake, Malbec being the famous Argentine wine, for my 40th birthday Bucaramanga edition. It was a truly unforgettable gesture. On my last day in Bucaramanga, I had wanted to buy a charm for a bracelet that I had been given for my 40th birthday back in Melbourne. A friend of mine, Alejandra, herself a Colombian living in Melbourne, had given me a Pandora bracelet, one of those where you can collect charms from all around the world. The bracelet had come to me with a small backpack charm already on it, and my plan was to add one charm for each country that I visited. In practice, finding a charm for every country that I went to proved tricky. In some places, the cost was prohibitive. In other places, the charm wasn't just quite right, and in other places, I actually didn't spend very long in some countries. So I set about identifying a symbol that could be a charm that would have some sort of personal connection for me to that country to represent it. So that afternoon with Vitelma, I went out to an artisanal craft store and I found an earring with an accordion on it that I could fashion into a charm. This was going to be the first charm of my journey, and I'm not really one for collecting souvenirs when I travel. For me, the best souvenirs are my photos and my memories. However, this was a really cute way of, I guess, having one thing from each country which would remind me of each place. Because I was going to be sourcing my own charms from each country, I wasn't just following the Pandora standard. I decided to set a bunch of personal criteria for searching for these charms. The first one would be that it would need to somehow represent the country. But then secondly, it would need to be personal to me. It would need to be something that I had somehow interacted with, or it would need to have some meaning for me in relation to that country. Hence, the Christmas Eve accordion that I played with Eolices in Bucaramanga in Colombia. Thirdly, it would need to be something that I had actually seen with my own eyes. And fourthly, and perhaps most trickily, it would need to have a corresponding emoji on social media so that I would be able to make photos and reels about it. So stay tuned to see how this unfolds over the next 16 countries that I visit. The next morning, it was time to say goodbye, but only briefly, because in a few days I would be catching up with the family again in another town. However, now I was heading towards Cúcuta, where a friend who had just returned from Australia was waiting. Even though it would be a full day of travel, I couldn't leave the Santander region without catching up with Javier one last time. And just in case you're wondering, yes, this is a different Javier to the one that I was staying with in Bogota and Medellin. The drive to Cúcuta was a long one, about 10 hours, but it offered a stunning showcase of Colombia's diverse landscapes. We climbed higher over the Andes, passing towns at extreme altitudes where the air was crisp and the scenery could have been mistaken for England or Scotland. Then, gradually, we descended to the other side of the range into the hot, bustling and sweaty city of Cúcuta, which sits on the border with Venezuela. Cúcuta is really not much of a tourist destination. However, I did have a great time catching up with Javier. We went out for dinner and then sampled the local nightlife. The next morning, I got back on another bus and headed towards Ocaña, back over the mountain range again. The road over towards Ocaña was slightly less winding and hilly than the one over to Cúcuta, and by evening I arrived in Ocaña just in time for dinner. To my surprise, they had prepared yet another 40th birthday celebration, so this was now the third one in Colombia, where they took us out for dinner and had a lemon and poppy seed cake. Even more extended family were there that time, and all of them were wishing me happy birthday. It was truly heartwarming. After dinner, we went to a local fun fair that had been set up in a park. There, we boarded a miniature train that wound through the streets of Ocaña. We whooped and screamed as we made our way through the streets, obviously becoming the obnoxious tourists that everyone rolls their eyes at. At one junction, a man on the street started performing a pole dance with his bicycle. It was absolutely hilarious until the police came along and told him to keep moving. Back at the fair, we walked through a haunted house, and the figures in there were pretty scary, but also pretty scary was Sandra, who was grabbing onto my shirt and screaming in my ear the entire way. Thanks, Sandra. The next morning, I woke up very early to continue my journey towards the coast, where I had planned to spend New Year's Eve. My time in Santander was coming to an end, but it was a time that I will never forget. The love, that I was shown, the generosity, the kindness. This was a Christmas like no other, and I thank you all so much, and I love you all so much. Stay tuned, because next week I will be ringing in the new year in Cartagena on Colombia's Caribbean coast. That's coming to you this Thursday, New Year's Day, in Latin America Diaries.